friends, Laurelei Black here from Blade and Broom, and this week we're going to be talking about books that you probably want to read. So, several months ago when I first started the channel, one of my very good friends suggested that I do a video on the well-read witches bookshelves, and so I've been putting that list together and thinking and compiling and coming to the realization that I would recommend just like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books, and nobody's going to read them all. Maybe there are some of you out there that are like me that are just like, give me all the books. Definitely this list that I'm going to give you today is not exhaustive. So I'm going to start with that caveat, and I have a couple of others that I need to mention because this list is complex. And I know that there are so many that I would just like to add to it that I can't necessarily because the video would be way too long and very convoluted and hard for you to get to. So some of the other little caveats that I would like to give you about this book list are that it's very Tradcraft focused because that's where my reading has been. I am a Tradcrafter, not a Wiccan, right? So I haven't done a lot of Wiccan reading necessarily. I did some in the beginning when I was first sort of getting my feet and finding my path, but by and large, my reading has been about traditional witchcraft practices. So most of the books are going to be very traditional witchcraft based. So really this is a well-read traditional witches bookshelf. Although some of the titles are really going to work pretty well for general craft reading as well. So if you're just starting out and you don't really know if Tradcraft or Wicca is the right path for you, or if you don't like those kinds of labels and don't want to be shackled by those types of boxes, shackling with boxes, then, you know, feel free to just explore the titles and see what strikes your fancy. One of the other caveats that I have to give is that some of the books are out of print or really hard to find these days. Some of the really phenomenal writing that happened about the type of craft that I practice happened back in the 60s and 70s and maybe the early 80s, and the publishing houses that printed them are no longer publishing, or they're just no longer printing these titles for a number of reasons. So some of the books are actually really, really hard to come by, and to that end I would say if you're able to borrow the book from a friend or sit at their house and read it, because sometimes they won't let them out of their sight. I have lost more than one of these books by loaning them out to people and then never seeing the book again. Sad face. But if you're able to borrow the book or, you know, spend some quality time with these witchy books, or come across it in some other way, do it. However you can, do it. Because they're so good. And then another thing that I feel like is worth mentioning, and I'm not going to give this as a caveat because I think that it's wonderful. I love it. But some of the reading can be a little thorny or sort of rambling or windy or a little like impenetrable for some folks because just the language usage is very poetic or it's very academic. It's very sort of mythopoetic, which is a word you hear me use a lot. And there are reasons for that. There are very witchy mystery reasons for that. And I myself tend to go between sort of laying it all out for you and being really clear and specific and saying this is this and that is that. And then leaping over the hedge into very figurative language myself. So some of these authors just use very figurative language all along the way. And for some folks, you know, that helps trigger the light bulb going off, and that initiates that aha moment and that sort of spark of the soul. And for other folks, they're like, what the fuck is this? So take that, I guess, with a grain of salt, that some of them are going to be, a lot of them are going to be kind of mythopoetic in their nature. And if you like that, you're going to like this reading list. And if not, then maybe some of the more modern treatments on traditional witchcraft will be a little more accessible for you and still convey a lot of the same meaning. So with that, let's get started looking at the actual lists. So for a lot of folks, traditional witchcraft just isn't traditional witchcraft without Robert Cochrane or Roy Bowers. Roy Bowers was his legal given name, and Robert Cochrane was the alias under which he wrote to publications like the Pentagram. One of the books that you can find this writing of his collated under is The Roebuck and the Thicket, which is written by Evan John Jones, and then has the Robert Cochrane writings in it, or at least most of the Robert Cochrane writings in it. However, that book is out of print. So when you find it online, it's often like $785 or something insane. So a really fantastic alternative to that incorporates all of his writings, or again, at least almost all of his writings, is The Taper That Lights the Way by Shawnee Oates. And Shawnee Oates is actually the maid of the Clan of Tupelo, which is Robert Cochrane's coven. In fact, speaking of books by Shawnee Oates, I would recommend absolutely everything that Shawnee has put together. So there is a series of books, and The Taper That Lights the Way is part of that series. I think it's book 3 in that series. The series is called The Star-Crossed Serpent, and I think there are 5 books in that series. Read all of them. They're all worth the read. And then Shawnee has also written another book that I highly recommend called Tupelo's Green Fire, and it is a dive into the mysteries of the Clan of Tupelo. So particularly if you are a student of anything that is a Cochranian-derived tradition of witchcraft, read these books. At the very, very least, read Tupelo's Green Fire and The Taper That Lights the Way if you don't have access to any of the other Robert Cochrane writings. Now, a lot of the Robert Cochrane writings are actually available online in free versions, including through the Clan of Tupelo-Cain's website. So you may be able to access a lot of what you need just by doing some Google searches and going to clanoftupelocain.org. One of the very first books on traditional witchcraft that I read, and in fact one of the very first books on witchcraft that I read, was Witchcraft, A Tradition Renewed by Doreen Valiente. It's another one that's out of print, so it's hard to find, but you can still find this one, and at a price that won't make your knees buckle. And I highly, highly recommend it. In fact, most of Doreen's work I would highly recommend. Doreen spent a lot of time working with both tradcraft and what ended up becoming Wicca and the roots of Wicca. Doreen is one of the mothers of modern witchcraft, and in fact, The Witch's Rune was written by Doreen, and things like the long version of the Wiccan Reed and that type of thing. So there's a lot of foundational pieces that almost all witches are familiar with that were written by Doreen Valiente, even if they're not really familiar with Doreen Valiente. So it is worth your time and effort to become familiar with Doreen and to give her some homage and some honor and some due credit in your craft practice, because your craft practice has undoubtedly been influenced by Doreen, whether you are a Wiccan aligned witch or a trad crafter or something in between. So some of her other books include The Rebirth of Witchcraft, An ABC of Witchcraft, Witchcraft for Tomorrow, and Natural Magic. Hi friends, I just wanted to take a hot second to say that I am really glad you're here and watching, whether you have just found the channel or you've been watching since the beginning. Thank you so much. And I also wanted to let you know that if you are enjoying this fantastic witchy content, to do that YouTube thing where you subscribe and click the bell. I'm really disoriented, so I don't know which side it's on, but wherever it is, click it, so that you don't miss any of the upcoming content. And also to interact with me and let me know what kind of stuff you'd like to see. I have lots of ideas and I will ramble on about the things that I'm really interested in, but I would also like to know what kind of stuff you'd like to see coming out. Also, I do a ton of witchy things outside of YouTube. Books, events, printable grimoire pages, writing. Online classes coming soon, including the Red Thread Academy of Witchcraft, which is going to be a way to study with me and with my witchcraft tradition no matter where you live. So if you're interested in checking those things out, my link tree is down in the description box below, and it is a way for you to hook up and connect with me through all the things. All right, back to content, Laurelei. Peter Patton's book, Grimoire for Modern Cunning Folk, is a wonderful sort of contemporary or more contemporary look at traditional witchcraft. It was written in the 90s or early 2000s, I think, not too long before Peter's passing away. So Peter Patton was the founder of Pendraig Publishing, which published several traditional witchcraft books in the 1990s and early 2000s, and he was a member of 1734, which is an American expression of traditional witchcraft. And the founder of 1734, Joe Wilson, was in close communication with Roy Bowers, Robert Cochrane, and part of their correspondence actually forms the Robert Cochrane writings that we read and that are so foundational to so many people who practice traditional witchcraft. And then he was also a member of Wildwood Grove, which is a Welsh traditional practice that's founded here in America. There's a lot of really good information that has come out of that part of Southern California. And in fact, Robin Artisan's first book, The Witching Way of Hollow Hill, was first published through Pendraig. And several other craft authors have gotten their start through there. There's a lot of really good information that came from there. So take a look at their list of titles because there's just a lot of good stuff there. Speaking of Robin Artisan, pretty much anything Robin has written, I would recommend that you read. If you're interested in tradcraft, Robin's books are full of them. And he doesn't always use the term traditional craft, although sometimes he does. Doesn't always use the term witchcraft for what he's doing, but that's what it is. And sometimes he very much does use the term witchcraft for what he's doing. He often uses terms like the old faith or the faith or fairy tradition, but traditional witchcraft, folkloric witchcraft is absolutely what's happening in his books. There are several that really stand out to me that I would recommend if you're looking for a way in to get started, because he has several titles. So The Witching Way of Hollow Hill, I would highly recommend. Anne Caro Gwen, I would highly recommend. And his newest release, The Clovenstone Workings, I would also highly recommend. Another tradcraft author whose work I would recommend, pretty much everything they've written, is Gemma Gary. Now Gemma is writing out of the Cornish witchcraft tradition, which is going to be a little bit different than what I've necessarily practiced, but it has so many close correlations, and there's just no denying the power of that variation of traditional craft. So if it speaks to you, especially run with it, but there is so much good juiciness in it that you really ought to take some time to read at least one of her books, and if they speak to you, read lots of them, because there's good stuff there. So some of the titles that you might consider as your entryway into Gemma's work include The Black Toad, The Charmer's Psalter, Traditional Witchcraft, A Book of Cornish Ways, The Devil's Dozen, and Silent as the Trees. So there are a few books by some other authors that I haven't had a chance to read yet, although in some cases I own the book already and I just haven't read it yet because I'm working through some other projects or some other reading lists, or that kind of thing. Or I just haven't purchased the book yet, but it's on my to-do list. But I know the author's work in other contexts, and I feel pretty confident in recommending it. So these books are going to be more accessible to you if you want to check them out, and you can't get copies of the Doreen Valiente and the Evan John Jones and all of those types of books that I've been recommending. So Laura Tempest Zaycroft's Weaving the Liminal, and Beesam's Staying and Sword by Orapello and Maguire, and Keldon's book, The Crooked Path, along with Nigel Pearson's Treading the Mill, are all books that I feel pretty confident recommending, even though I personally have not read them yet. And if you are interested, I will read them and come back to you with a recommendation one way or the other. If that's something you're interested in, drop a comment down below and I will get back with you. These are not all like super new releases. Some of them are newer than others. They've been out for a little while. It's just that as a sort of longer practicing trad crafter, you don't always read like the here's how to trad craft 101 type books right as soon as they come out, because you're like, I already know how to trad craft 101. So that's also part of why I haven't always read all of those brand new releases. I will just sort of tell you though that there are 2 books coming out in 2021, like kind of early in 2021, like in the spring, that I am super excited about, and those are Via Hedera's upcoming work on folkloric American witchcraft, which is certainly right up my alley since I founded American folkloric witchcraft with my partner. So a book on folkloric American witchcraft, I cannot wait. And then the book by Corey Thomas Hutchison of New World Witchery that's coming up. He already has one book that's already been out called 57 Devils. But he has a new title that's coming out, and I am really, really excited about that. And it's just called New World Witchery. And that's going to be contributing a lot to the study of traditional American craft practice. And it's very folkloric in nature. And again, right up my alley. So these are both people that are contributing vastly to the study of what it is that I've been doing and studying and practicing for years and putting content out there since forever. So I'm super excited about those. And I think they're both available for pre-sale on Amazon. So if that's something you're interested in, you should get those as well. So other folkloric goodness, if you, like me, are interested in the folkloric aspects of witchcraft and not just the how-tos and wherefores and why-nots. So folkloric titles that you might be interested in and that would provide a great grounding in mythopoesis and folkloric study and that type of thing include The White Goddess by Robert Graves. This is one of those thorny ones that can be difficult in places to read because he was super coked up when he wrote parts of it. Sorry, but he was. Brilliant, beautiful stuff. Some of it is super not supported by history or other types of mythic study or analysis, but some of his stuff is just really brilliant and very insightful. You have to read it with a critical eye and be willing to dive into some places and move on from other places and come back to it. It's just sort of a cyclical process with that book. It just kind of is. So just take that and go with it, I guess. Nigel Jackson has several books that I would recommend. And again, Nigel Jackson is one of those authors that if you can get any of his work, I recommend it, but it's difficult to find. Most of it has been published through Capelban and most of his titles aren't available anymore. But if you can find them, get them. And sometimes you can find them, again, for prices that won't hurt you too badly. But Call of the Hornpiper and Masks of Misrule are definitely ones that give you a very good insight into folkloric understandings of traditional craft, and especially folkloric insight into the Magister or the folkloric devil of the craft, which is a figure we're going to be talking about in just a couple of weeks, as a matter of fact. I have him planned for 2 weeks from now. We're going to be talking about the folkloric devil, heresy, and other such scandalous topics within witchcraft. His work really helps penetrate that, I think, in some really good ways. The Mabinogion. And really, I feel like there are several good translations of the Mabinogion that you could use, so just get a copy of the Mabinogion and read the Mabinogion. If you were working with any of the Arthurian legends at all in your craft, if you were working with any Welsh, British, Celtic, ranging stuff within your craft, the Mabinogion will be helpful for you. Emma Wilby's work is fantastic. Expensive, but fantastic. So her work's not out of print. Her work is just expensive because it's scholarly, it's academic, and so it's written it's written for college students. It's textbook level stuff, and so it's very like anthropological and historical and that type of thing. So it tends to be, you know, you're going to spend $50, $60 per book to get a paperback, but they're incomparable, and you want them if you're interested in the folklore at all of things like the witch trials in Europe, or the cunning folklore, and or the Basque witch trials and that type of thing. You really want her work to be able to help shed light on that. So her titles include Cunning Folk and Familiar Spirits, Visions of Isabel Gowdy, and Invoking the Acalair. And then one that is not very expensive to get is The Real Mother Goose by Blanche Wright. I recommend this particular version of the Mother Goose collection of nursery rhymes. There is so much embedded in nursery rhymes, and the Blanche Wright copy is the one that I had with my children when I sort of recognized, oh my gosh, look at all of the witchcraft that's in Mother Goose. Hello, Frau Hulda. Thanks for showing up. So I highly recommend having that and starting to allow yourself to sort of see what's there. And I will be happy to talk with you about that in more detail as well. We've got some of that over at the now archived American Folkloric Witchcraft blog. That's afwcraft.blogspot.com. There's some where we talk about counting out chants and other things in nursery rhymes that you can find, but there's so much. And it's a good place to start. That and fairy tales, and there are so many fairy tales, so just start collecting books of fairy tales from all over the world, because dive in. As far as general craft, I already mentioned some things by Doreen Valiente, but I would add to that Paul Hewson's Mastering Witchcraft. It is very accessible, I think, to both trad crafters and Wiccans. Perhaps a little more leaning toward tradcraft, but it really doesn't take a flavor in particular, I don't think. But I found it sort of very accessible to me. And then I will just throw in there as like maybe a shameless plug, but my own Book of Shadows that I offer for sale in my Etsy shop, I think is accessible to both. It definitely has a heavy hand of tradcraft because that's what I practice and that's what I write about and that's what I produce. But I have gotten lots of great reviews from people who practice something other than tradcraft, who have found the pages that I produce to be very useful to them and full of information. My stuff's not just flowery and pretty, it is, much like this channel, chock full of information. I can't just do short and sweet, that's not my style. So if you're interested in sort of short digestible treatments on lots of topics, that's a good place to start. Some books related to history that you might be interested in would be Margo Adler's Drawing Down the Moon. It's a little dated at this point, just a little bit, because, you know, she was writing in the 80s when she published that book. So, you know, there's been a lot of history since then in terms of what's happened within the craft, but it'll definitely give you a lot of perspective about what had happened up until that point. And then Ronald Hutton has 3 books that I would recommend. The Triumph of the Moon, Stations of the Sun, and A History of Modern Pagan Witchcraft. And Ronald Hutton is a professor, actually, at the University of Oxford. So his work is stellar, and he's producing new content all the time as well. So you can find other things that he's been working on. And he's sure to come out with more good stuff in the future, including sometimes you can find lectures and things that he's doing. So keep an eye out for stuff like that. A few books about magic and spellcraft. And I could really spend so much time talking about this topic. There are, like, we could deep dive into this. And I would say that there probably aren't a lot that are really like tradcraft focused or even Wiccan focused. These are sort of like more general formularies and that type of thing that you're just going to find collections of information about, as opposed to things being focused on a particular tradition, which might actually be exactly right up your alley, right? If you're looking for things that sort of don't have a particular tradition's flavor already thrown all over them. So to that end, I would say all of the encyclopedias and collections of how-tos that Scott Cunningham put together are very useful and well worth adding to your library. Cunningham did have a very Wiccan flavor to him, so if Wicca is not your bag, I would still add them, to be honest. They're definitely part of my library, and I am a dyed-in-the-wool traditionalist, but he knew his stuff, so I would add them. And that includes the Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs, the Encyclopedia of Crystal Gem and Metal Magic, Magical Herbalism, the Book of Incense, Oils, and Brews. Another encyclopedist that I highly recommend their work is Judica Ills. Judica has written several encyclopedias that make, and other types of books that make really great reference material and that you'll find yourself going back to a lot if you have them on hand. And some of the ones that I reference a lot in my own spiritual practice and my own magical research include her Encyclopedia of Witchcraft, her Encyclopedia of 5,000 Spells, and her Encyclopedia of Spirits. So I just can't recommend them enough. And they're not necessarily books that you're going to sit down and read cover to cover. They're huge tomes, right? Like, they're very large books, but you could if you were just really interested in the material, because they're very engaging the way that she writes, and they're just full of so much great information. And you will never find yourself running out of information. And she has diligently done her research and gives great credit and respect to all of the cultures that she treats with in these books. And I can say without hesitation that I don't believe her work to be appropriative or inappropriate in that regard. So those are all the books that I'm recommending right now. Like I said, I could actually really go on about this topic, and I feel like I've gone on and on and on and on. I could dive into other categories if you're interested. I could do deep dives into some of the categories I've already touched on if you'd like me to go a little bit deeper. But let me know in the comments if that's something that you're interested in, or if you'd like me to do book reviews on things that I'm reading. Like I said, some of the things that I might read might be things that have been out for a little while already. Or if you know of a book that's coming up and you're like, hey, Laurelei, let me know what you think about this one that's coming, then, drop me a line about that too. I'd be interested in doing that with you. So comment, like, subscribe, share, do all the things. And I will see you guys back here next Monday at noon. Bye, friends.